Hi, I'm Zara Imtiaz. Welcome to Asian Agribiz podcast. Today, Arif Fakhruddin is speaking to Doug Korver, Professor Emeritus at the University of Alberta and President of Alpine Poultry Nutrition Inc. in Canada, about necrotic enteritis challenge model.
Okay, your project in broilers is related to gut health and to move away from AGP, where you and your team have developed a necrotic enteritis challenge model. Could you tell us what model is this? Why is it important to be researched? And how will this benefit broiler producers?
Sure. So, of course, as we move away from using growth-promoting antibiotics in broiler diets, one of the challenges that we have is an increase in the risk for necrotic enteritis. And so, of course, that's a very serious intestinal disease. It can, in its clinical form, lead to high levels of mortality and obviously decreased productivity. However, probably the bigger economic impact is subclinical necrotic enteritis. So the birds don't actually appear very sick. They don't have clinical signs. We don't see a lot of mortality, but we do see decreases in the performance of the birds. So we see decreased growth rate. We see increased feed conversion ratios. And we see a reduction in meat yield. So the subclinical form, although it's less severe, because it's more widespread, especially in the absence of growth-promoting antibiotics, actually has a bigger impact on the productivity of the flock. And so we've learned a lot over the years from clinical necrotic enteritis challenge models where birds are given a large dose of Clostridium perfringens, which is the causative organism of necrotic enteritis. Usually it's given in conjunction with an Eimeria or coccidiosis challenge to cause gut disruption. But there's a couple of limitations with those traditional models. So first of all, again, the subclinical form is really much more important economically than clinical. And so if we give a really strong challenge and we get lots of mortality, those studies have been important to understand the development of disease and the biology of the organisms. But the subclinical form is more relevant. The other advantage with our subclinical, it's a natural exposure challenge model, is that our model, there's a normal, natural development or progression of the disease that follows what happens in the barn. So maybe I should just describe the challenge model briefly so the listeners have some context. So what we do is at about 12 days of age, we give the birds a high dose of a coccidiosis vaccine. And we do it this way rather than seeding the litter and building up the parasites in the litter. We give it by gavage. And so this allows us to give a consistent dose to each bird. And in addition, in Alberta, where I do my research, we have very dry conditions. And so it's difficult to get good consistent cycling of the parasites through the litter. Of course, the Eimeria have an external phase of development as well as an internal phase. And so we allow 6 days or so for those parasites to infect the intestines, to replicate in the intestines, and then they burst out of the intestinal epithelial cells and the enterocytes, and they cause gut damage. And that gut damage, the Clostridium perfringens, the bacteria that causes necrotic enteritis, is an opportunistic pathogen. So when there's an increase in mucus production and when there's an increase in nutrients available both from the damage to the intestinal cells and a reduction in nutrients being absorbed from the gut, that creates conditions for the Clostridium perfringens to proliferate. And so we typically look at we do intestinal lesion scoring about 2 to 3 days after that, we expect that break of gut disruption. So we look at lesion scores, gross lesion scores. We look at histological examinations of intestinal slides of intestinal samples. And in particular, we look at the performance. And so typically with our challenge model, we have a positive control with antibiotics and a coccidiostat. So that in theory should offer the maximum protection. Then we have a negative control with no coccidiostat and no antibiotic. That should allow us to see whether or not our challenge model is successful. And then we add our test ingredients to the negative control diet to see if it allows the performance of the birds to recover to the level of the positive control. And depending on the degree of recovery, we can assess how effective our test products are in protecting from necrotic enteritis.
So what are the results and the benefits that broiler producers in the world and also in Asia can learn from this?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a global phenomenon, either through legislation or through consumer pressures, typically through large purchasers such as fast food restaurants. But there's a global pressure. So even countries that may not have bans on antibiotics, if they're a large exporter, they will have to follow the production requirements of the countries that they're exporting it to. So having knowledge of methods to potentially replace growth-promoting antibiotics will allow producers to meet their production goals, to minimize losses due to necrotic enteritis, even in the absence of growth-promoting antibiotics. And so we're using our challenge model to test a variety of different proposed alternatives to antibiotics. Most of the products that we've tested have been novel products with varying degrees of success. And so it could also be applied to testing commercially available products as well.
Could you elaborate more on the assessment of different candidates for antibiotic replacement? Because in the market, so many types of feed additives, probiotics, prebiotics, organic acids, different types.
Exactly, yeah. And so over the years, what I've come to realize is that well, we know that growth-promoting antibiotics have been very effective, and it's allowed us to maybe it's allowed us to maybe not be as careful as we need to be. And when we remove those, some of the weaknesses in our production systems, whether it's biosecurity or sanitation or early brooding and nutrition, things like that, we're more likely to see any gaps in those management areas exposed. And so antibiotics were very effective at covering a lot of different problems. They were extremely effective. And I won't get into the reasoning for why we're moving away. I think that's probably been discussed quite a bit. But the fact is we are moving away. The challenge is that there isn't a single product that we can say, okay, we'll take antibiotics out of the diet and we'll put in, whatever the product is, and everything will be just the way it was when we had antibiotics. And so the challenge is that there are individual products that are effective under certain conditions. And the difficult thing is that the conditions differ from farm to farm. Even on a farm, they can vary from season to season. And so typically what we're seeing in farms or companies where the transition to antibiotic-free production has been most effective is using a combination of different alternatives having different mechanisms. So certain things like probiotics may be more effective early in the bird's life. Prebiotics that increase the production of short-chain fatty acids, in particular butyrate, can be effective to cover part of the challenge. And there's a large number of different products. There's plant-derived products. There's essential oils, there's organic acids, there are prebiotics and probiotics and immune modulators. And so it's difficult for me to say you should use this and this and this, because what I find in industry, for the companies that are making this work, really what they're doing is they're finding the combination of ingredients that work for them. And it's not just necessarily trying different things until you find the right combination, just guessing what it might be. But if you understand what your challenges are, then you can start to say, okay, well, what specific antibiotic alternative is effective against this particular challenge? So, for example, if the problem is early colonization of the gut with Salmonella, one of the dietary things that we can do is use probiotics to sort of protect the gut until the gut microflora becomes more established and is able to prevent Salmonella from colonizing. Later on in life, the issue might be necrotic enteritis. And so if we can identify approaches or strategies or products that are effective against necrotic enteritis or Clostridium perfringens, we can use those products in combination in order to cover as many different bases as we can. And then, of course, biosecurity becomes really important, and understanding what's going on in the barn. So over time, bacterial pathogens can build up, and you might do just fine for 3 or 4 or 5 flocks and then have a problem. And so you need to look at your sanitation schedule. You need to look at biosecurity. You need to look at brooding. Everything that we can do to get those chicks off to a good start is going to make it easier to use those other products in the diet to help give us a little bit more of an advantage. And with each product that we add strategically, then we can get better coverage and more reliable coverage. Because, of course, every time we add a product, we add a cost to the diet. So we have to look at return on investment as well.
Yeah. So there is no single bullet to replace antibiotics, and specific combination of additives. So broiler producers must test and adjust according to their farm conditions, right?
Right. And there are things that, so for example, if water quality is a big problem, the best way to deal with that is deal with the water quality issue. So whether it's microbial contamination or whether it's chemical levels or pH, we can't, not every problem is going to be dealt with a dietary solution. So we really need to understand what's going on in our barns, what specific challenges are we facing, and what's going to be the most effective way to deal with that particular challenge. And if we start with the big challenges, the obvious challenges, that's where we're going to have the biggest wins and most quickly. And then as it gets, as we get to the 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th most important challenge, that's where we're really starting to refine our approach and understand how to use combinations of ingredients to address specific challenges. I had a colleague who is a producer who has transitioned over time in Canada to antibiotic-free, and he said it took him about 10 years of trying different things and understanding. So, I mean, there was improvement all along the way, but to get to the point where he was confident that his risk was pretty low for necrotic enteritis, and he was getting good performance. So, it's important to measure. It's important to understand where you're seeing gains, and keep doing what's working. And if something's not working, maybe try something different.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Do you have plans to do research about this necrotic enteritis challenge model in Asian conditions? Or I should put it this way, is that easy for Asian broiler producers to mimic or replicate this model so that they can do by themselves and try to get the best combination of additives for their farms?
So we've published the method. So we've published the method, and if people want to use it, We published it in Frontiers of Physiology in 2022. So if researchers want to use it, I'm happy to answer questions. And with the increased environmental temperatures and humidity typical of Asian production, the challenge model, might actually work even a little bit better. So we continue to try and modulate the challenge model. We've been getting statistically significant results, but I would like to see it be a little bit stronger, a little bit more of a challenge. So still subclinical, but a little bit stronger effect on performance. So yeah, I'd be happy to collaborate with people that are interested in using the model in Asia.
Thank you for listening to another Asian Agribiz podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this show on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts.